Hello and welcome to PM Express. My name is Nana Ansakwa and I'm sat here in UNDP's office in Accra. Folks, in 5 years and 2 months, it will be the year 2020. Well, the whole world is moving fast ahead and other nations are coming up with fantastic innovations. Here we are again as Africans battling with disease, poverty and excuses. And what are we talking about today? Ebola. What are we doing? We have leaders leading ostentatious life, globe-trotting with the begging bowls stretching for arms and aid and medical help and in some cases military men to come solve our problem. Is it sometimes because of excessive diplomacy we've been told, oh, you're doing well, then keep on trying? Or is it about time we are told in the face that grow up because you don't have any excuses? With me to discuss this is Abdoulaye Mahdia, who is the UN Assistant Secretary General and also Director for UNDP's Regional Bureau for Africa. And I'm sure today he's going to lay it bare. Thank you very much, Mr. Ma.
Thank you, Nana.
Well, why is Africa thinks that the world owes it? Let me start from there. Why do we still think that the world owes us?
Well, let me first say that if we're sitting here a year ago, we'll be celebrating Africa Renaissance in the economic front. We all have seen that after 2 lost development decades in the 80s and the 90s, Africa has been really moving extremely fast on the economic ladder, and everybody was saying that a year ago, the hopeless continent that we were talking 20 years ago is now the hopeful continent. But now we're going through a sad moment again. We have 3 fragile countries that have been hit with this disease. And losing much of their peace dividends and the development gains. It's a very sad moment. But allow me first to send our collective prayers to those departed souls that have left us prematurely. It's extremely sad. And salute the resolve of the international community to deal with this. This is not an African issue. And I agree with the Security Council when they invoked Chapter 7 of the Charter saying that this is a threat to international peace. It is not something that Africa has created. It's true, it's happened in the continent. It could have happened anywhere else, but it is seriously hitting not only Africa, but threatening the entire world. So it's a collective endeavor. All of us must chip in, gather our energy and resources, and deal with it.
I know it's not an African problem, but we take the 2 Spanish citizens that contacted Ebola, I think, in Liberia. And the nation sent a whole jumbo jet for just the 2 patients. They took them, isolated them, gave them all the care. Unfortunately, they passed out. But you could tell the urgency and what those nations did for those 2 citizens. We come back here and our excuse is that we don't have money. But I'm sure if we had the will, we would do it. And that's what the frustration is.
Yes, I agree, and we're doing the maximum. Look what Nigeria is doing, sending 200 doctors in the region, and that should continue. I was just meeting with President Mahama an hour ago, and I was saluting his leadership as leader of ECOWAS, and for agreeing to host and home here the UN mission for the Ebola response. That's a leadership that we have to recognize. And Africans, leaders have already put forward a solidarity fund that is homed in ECOWAS. And I would like to call here for all African countries and the diaspora to invest in that solidarity fund. We have to be the frontliners as Africans to deal with it, and I agree with you. And what Ghana has done, and what Senegal has done by offering Dakar to be a hub for a humanitarian corridor is something to be saluted. And this has to be scaled up. True, it's an international issue, started in Africa, but we Africans have to show that we are at the front line in this battle.
Again, I join you to congratulate the President for doing this hub. But here we are engulfed with cholera, and it's one of the most inexcusable diseases in 2014.
Yes.
To have, 17,000 cases and about 150 deaths so far. Cholera.
Yes.
It tells you are indisciplined, probably illiterate, and very careless. So are we in the position, I don't want to use the word moral right, but who are we to even say, oh, well, we're going past our corolla, or we're leaving that issue aside, now we're going to tackle Ebola? I mean, how do we...
No, Ebola is a sad reminder to all of us that development starts with two issues: strong institutions and a strong social contract. And frankly, we have not been investing a lot on those two issues. Had we invested on strong institutions, including health institutions, we could have contained the issue when it started in the region of Gekegu in Guinea. We are, let's face it, we have neglected this investment, and it's a sad reminder. It's a lesson to all of us that we have to invest on very strong institutions. And we have to ensure that there is a social contract. Society is cohesive and trust governments. Sometimes you can see that there are trust issues. People are not listening to the message government are sending. So development starts with having strong institutions and strong social contract. There is a sad lessons to draw from this Ebola case. That's the lessons.
Now, how grave is this epidemic?
Extremely grave. I used to say that this is running exponentially, and we are running on a linear track. The disease have taken the lift, and we are taking the staircase. It's difficult to catch. If we don't realize that, this will hit us extremely badly. I have seen the statistical projections of the CDC, Center of Development Control and Prevention in the US. If the trend continues, if we don't stop the outbreak in the next 60 days or 90 days, come January 1st, we might hit the 1 million people affected, and that will be a disaster, not only from the three epicenter countries, but for the entire sub-region and for the world. So it behooves us to really garner our energy, gather our resources, and deal with it. It is doable. There are resources, it is doable. We have to invest on vaccines, we have to invest on containing and stopping this, we have to invest on tracking people affected, but it is doable. It's a world threat, and if the world together garner the resources, we can fix it.
I was in London, I think about 2 weeks ago. And that was when that patient was flown to Dallas with the Ebola. And constantly on Fox TV, I mean, they talked about Ebola as if it was a toothache. So even watching it, I wasn't scared of the disease. But I realized that when we are talking about Ebola on this side of the world, it looks as if it has a machine gun and it's coming to kill you. And so we react to it differently. Are we doing something to send a message so that we don't resent people and know how to treat them? Because I don't think that message is coming out clearly.
You're right. We still need to work. There's a fear factor, which is even more dangerous than anything, and the despair factor. Those are things that we have to really deal with. I know it's not easy to be cool, calm, and collected when we have this and people dying. 8,000 people affected, 3,500 dying is scary. But we have to be cool-headed if we want to deal with this stuff. We must not panic, and leaders must not panic. I have heard voices that say, well, let's quarantine these countries. That will be a disaster. And President Obama is wise enough to warn that quarantining countries is not the way to go. You have to contain people affected, do some tracking for people that they might have contaminated, but you cannot isolate countries. It will be a time bomb. It will catch us sooner. So let's enhance our wisdom, understanding that we are a global village. There is one part of the village that is burning, and if we don't fix it, the entire village will burn. And again, we have, as the world, all the means to do so. And we are all entrusted the UN Secretary General to lead in this endeavor, and so far I'm seeing good leadership put on the ground. It behoves us all now to just align behind that leadership and do the job.
Let me go back to when HIV/AIDS came on the scene. I mean, you see some of the posters, and it was like a horror movie. You know, bones, crossbones, and in our local parlance, they say that the AIDS termites are in there eating him up. So psychologically, you thought there was some little animals, literally eating the person up. And so we treated AIDS the same way, and people with AIDS were stigmatized. And even till today, we can't seem to get over that stigma. And I can see that going here, and I think that it will be much more dangerous with Ebola than even it was with AIDS.
And it is. That's why I say if we don't deal with fear factor, and you, the media, have a role to do here in educating people. Mm-hmm. It happened. It's tough to deal with, but it is fixable. I think the message we all have to give is that this is fixable, this is doable. It has started as a health crisis. All what we have to do is avoid that it transform itself, it mutate into a socio-economic crisis. And once it's mutate into a socio-economic crisis, then the price to pay will be huge, unfathomable. So we have really to be calm, cool, and collected, and gather our effort together, and then do the job.
Did we wait too long before getting into action?
Well, it's always easy in hindsight, after all this have happened, to say so. It was not that easy. I know a lot of blame game is going on. For me, it's not the order of the day. Mm-hmm. We'll look at it later. The order of the day is just deal with it. All those who have tried have been doing their best. I know that there is an accusation that WHO has been very slow in reacting. This is the first to see. This has not, with this proportion. Mm-hmm. Some 30 years ago, it happened in Central Africa. We contained, but the difference is that in Central Africa, you don't have the density and mobility of population you have in West Africa. Here, it is an open zone. Mm-hmm. People move, back and forth. Mm-hmm. So that makes it really, the burning huge of the bush. The burning of the bush extremely huge. So I would encourage all of us not to go into the blaming game, where we slow or not fast enough. But let's just focus our energy in quelling the fire here, which is burning the entire world. It might burn the entire world if we don't deal with it now.
Have they given us any reason why this trend is so aggressive? Because the one that appeared in the 70s was not so violent. What's making it so? Yeah, but
it's the containment. As I said, it's a lighted population density in Central Africa, in Zaire at that time, DRC, when it happened. So it's easier to contain. But here, the mobility within the Mano River Union country is extremely fluid. Overnight, you can move from one village to another village. And the burial tradition that we have, the custom that we have, all those played into making this a raging fire. So it's a unique cocktail. And I submit that we didn't predict that the mobility or the speed of this disease would be that fast. Again, taking the lift to we are following the disease through the staircases. It's difficult to catch if we don't change our mode of operation.
The UNMA, Mission for Ebola Emergency Response. So what will be their mandate now?
The mandate is just, number one, stop the outbreak. It's extremely important. As I said, in the next 60 days, if you don't stop the transmission, it will be to no, all this investment will be to no avail. It's extremely important to stop it, number one. Number two, maximum treatment. That's why we have to send doctors and nurses, build health facilities to do so. That's the objective number two. And number three, it's a health crisis, but it is still a development crisis. We have to deal with the essential. So essential services need to be enforced. Feeding people, helping people plant their seeds, reviving the economies. That's extremely important. And then the next objective of this mission is try to preserve all the gains that we have so far, the development gains, the peace dividends, and we are investing a lot in terms of early recovery, we, UNDP, so that the affected communities can go back to normal. And the fifth objective is what we call prevention. We should not only put all our attention on the epicenter countries, Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. We have to do preventive actions. All the countries in the sub-region should be having a preparedness plan and contingency plan. And I have seen the one that Ghana is putting forward, which is excellent. And Ghana is even doing some drilling and simulation exercise so that people know or build the habits to deal with it, God forbid, if that would happen. And it's an excellent plan. And we, the UN, we are supporting all the countries in the sub-region to have this contingency plan so that preparedness is there. That's the 5th mission of this mission of UNMIR. And UNMIR is doing all these 5 missions working in tandem with the entire UN agencies on the ground.
I mean, we still have doctors in Ghana who don't want to go near Ebola because they're still complaining about rubber gloves. They're still complaining about face masks. I mean, it doesn't get more basic than that.
Yeah.
And isn't it ironic that the same country where the doctors, complaining about not readiness is the same where we are, using as a base to go and fight the disease? I mean,
yeah, in a way they are right. We shouldn't be sending our people unprepared or unprotected. And this is, again, what I was calling for, all this support, the infrastructure, the logistic that we have to give them to fight. You cannot send your soldiers. I was telling you earlier that this is a fight.
Yeah.
You would not want to send your soldiers in the theater of operation without guns and arms and all this kind of stuff. We have to equip them. And UNMIR, the mission's, one of its activities is to mobilize facilities to support our soldiers, I mean the health workers that are going to fight this disease.
Well, some of the reports that you've brought out is that this disease could send some countries back, Liberia and Co, back 10 years in terms of the economy. How is it calculated, and how feasible is that?
Yeah. Those are primary, first estimations, and by the way, it can be even tougher. And it is. We are seeing congruence in the estimates. What we do as UNDP, for instance, without consulting with the bank or the ADB or the ECA, almost the same figures. And we all have seen that countries like Guinea was moving on the track of 4.9% growth rate in the last years. A country like Liberia, more than 5% growth rate, or even Sierra Leone, 11% growth rate. But all our calculations is showing that they will lose 3 to 5 points by the end of the year. So this is huge. And as I said, I have never seen these kinds of loss. It happened only in conflict situations. That's why I say fight against Ebola is a conflict. This is a war. Unfortunately, the disease is winning, but we are confident that we can defeat Infinite.
I'm going to take a break here and come back. When we come back, we're going to find out how we are going to build confidence to invite the international world in, because even when things are equal, it's tough getting people this side of the world. So now with Ebola scare, how do we build confidence, world confidence again, to start attracting the investments that we need? Stay tuned. Hello, and thanks for staying tuned. Just before the break, I was just wondering, with the West African region, we struggle to get proper investment, investment that will come into production, but that's where good investment, all investments are buy and sell. I don't think we have enough of that. We need proper investment to do production, go into agriculture. Who is going to come here with the scare of Ebola? Especially if you take Guinea, if you take Liberia, these regions, they are really going to suffer. What can we now do to restore, their faith? Because even if you invite somebody to come to Ghana, there's Ebola in West Africa. And for them, every country is now West Africa. How do we restore this confidence to get proper investment again?
Yeah. Very good question. Investors goes for safety and security. That's the international law, wherever you are. But the lessons I'm drawing here is that Africans must start investing themselves in Africa. What I have realized in most of these countries, Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone, the massive investment was coming in the extractive sector and basically foreign investments, which is good. Don't get me wrong, it is extremely good. But I think African private sector should lead the show because they'll be more resilient in terms of this kind of crisis and less prone to leave when we have this kind of crisis. After all, this is their assets, their continent, and so on and so on. Lessons learned is that government should really encourage the domestic private sector to invest in this country. But again, as I said, investment is triggered by safety and security. So we cannot not stop investing in bringing security and safety in these regions. And part of our mission, the UN, is to help the countries bring safety and security.
When HIV came, eventually, killed a few people, and then the AIDS, the antiretroviral medicine came out. And obviously, African countries have to buy this, and we spend millions and millions buying it. Should some African scientists go and come up with a medicine or a vaccine for this Ebola, or are we going to wait for the West to create another vaccine, and then the little aid that we get, we send it all back there to go and buy this vaccine? What do we do?
You're absolutely right, and this is the discourse that we are having. I am personally having with ECOWAS, and more specifically WAHO, the West African health organizations, and we can do it. If countries like India and others are investing on health vaccine, we can do it, and we are willing to support our very good doctors, by the way. We have good institute here in Africa. They might lack resources, but it is doable. It will be less costly, and again, lessons learned. We have institutes that can do it. Lack of capacity, and government should be helping them. The African Union, the ECOWAS, and us, the international community, should be behind bars to do it. It is feasible. We have talented doctors trained in great universities in Africa and outside of Africa. If they get their act together, they can do it, and we are willing to support. It's a message that I'm carrying wherever I go, and I see any medical institution. I say, look, guys, I mean, we are happy to be behind, but lead the show will be supporting you.
Ma, I mean, I'm sure by now my viewers have said that you're a fine gentleman. But should you be hard on this African leaders? I mean, tell them in the face that enough is enough. Because anytime we treat them with soft, they're very good at signing any paper. They will come to the meeting, sign all the papers, come back, shelve them, and go to sleep. But should you tell them in the face that, listen, grow up?
They did grow up. Again, you have to look at what happened in the 80s and 90s. I always remind people, whenever I travel, I take two of the Economist reports, the London newspaper, journal. There's one in 2000, March 2000, when it was titled Africa, the Hopeless Continent. Remember that one? And they did apologize. 10 years after, the title was Africa, the Rising Continent. It shows that things have changed, and we are not giving credit to African leaders. We have done an analysis of this economic performance in Africa the last 10 years. 3 factors explain this revolution, if I may say so. One is true, the external market, the external demand. This country have been hooked on the international market and been exporting a lot, especially primary products and extractives. That was 1/3 of the traction force of the growth that we have seen. 1/3 is coming from African themselves, what we call the demand factor. There's a growing middle class, so they did their job. They are pulling demand forward, which is impacting on growth, the African middle class. And then the third factor that we are neglecting is the good governance that we have seen in the country. So we have to give due credit to our leaders. By investing in good governance, they have transformed this continent. So we have to look at this continent with a sense of perspective.
No, but that's the dangerous. That's the danger. Because if I take Libya, Botswana, Rwanda, maybe South Africa, all the other leaders just ponder to what the West will say, and because you do that, then you're fine. But most businesses in all good businesses in all African countries are not owned by them. If you take Ghana, for instance, our oil, our gold, telecom, everything that seems to be growing, it's not yours. And therefore, those who own it would always say that, you know what, you're the best thing since sliced bread. But if you go home and think, you need to find out, what do my people own? How much of these resources do my people own? And it cuts across the continent.
That's not what I'm hearing and seeing and feeling when I discuss with presidents, new generation, or even older generation, presidents like President Sall in Senegal, Mahama in Ghana, Yahya Boni in Benin, Alassane Ouattara in Cote d'Ivoire. No. I see dynamic leaders, they want to lead and transform the continent. When I discuss with Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, I see different kind of leadership. If you put in perspective, you see that Africa is changing. They want to drive, and let's give them credit. It's not an easy journey. It's a long haul. But if you look at it with a sense of perspective, it's moving forward. Ghana is now one of the best mining code, trying to have the highest internal value retention in the extractive industry. And it's moving forward. I looked at the code in Eritrea. Eritrea is doing extremely fine. So you mentioned a few countries, but there are a few. We have 53 African countries. When you aggregate, you can see a dynamic power there on the ground. This continent is the move. As I said at the early beginning, we are going through a very sad moment, very terrifying moment, but that shouldn't dampen our resolve to drive this continent. I see emerging a new leadership. I see emerging a new generation of leaders, not only in government, but in the private sector. They are doing extremely fine. That's the narrative that we have to keep pounding and showing, and that's the narrative that will transform structurally this continent.
Now we have 6 vibrant telco companies in Ghana. Absolutely, top of the world. I mean, like I said, I was in London, and I still think ours was better.
Absolutely.
But they are not ours. They're owned by foreigners. We mine and export 5 million ounces of gold from our shores.
Yes.
But we have nothing to show that we've sent 5 million ounces of gold outside. We have oil, and we are signing blocks to private people. So I mean, I don't want to just give you a list. I can continue, and I know it cuts across, and that's why I come back to say that being where you are, if you don't, come clean and say, listen, at least you should own 50% of what is yours. At least 50%.
Going back to the sense of perspective, if you put your figures compared to what we have 20 years ago, you'll be amazed to see the progression. That's the way to go. And the movement has been set, I'm telling you. And we are advocating for that. That's why we supported that when Africa were designing the Common African Position for the post-2015, that the notion of structural economic transformation be at the heart of the matrix of Africa strategies or Africa New Vision. It is not an easy exercise. That's why it is important that you do it collectively. In this market, you cannot fight individually. Ghana can't do it alone, Senegal alone, Nigeria alone is a collective fight together. And if we don't invest in the togetherness, we will fail. So my plea would be that the vision is there, they have it. Now they have to fight together. It's together that you can make this transformation for Africa.
I agree with you that togetherness is absolutely, absolutely crucial, because we seem to be dealing with the international bodies individually, and I think it's dangerous too. I
fully agree. This asymmetry is to be stopped, and we have to understand. I'm glad we're having that discussion here in Ghana, which is, I would say the cradle of Pan-Africanism, and without that spirit, whatever we do will be very suboptimal. So if you have to, we need to bring back the spirit of the Kwame Nkrumahs, the Nassers, if he really wants to transform this continent.
Coming back to Ebola, are there funds available for countries that are preparing, and those that are dire? Are funds being made available, or we have to wait?
No, there are funds, not enough. We have a lot of resources going on, giving the priority to what we call the epicenter country for the response plan. Not enough. And I was just listening to the president of the World Bank yesterday, who was saying that the $1 billion that we are pledging is far from being sufficient. I agree with him. And the Secretary General is saying even multiply it by 20. We will need these resources, and I can tell you the world has these resources. Even us in the UN, we are doing what we call refocusing all our programs for this fight. So whatever we're doing that is secondary, we have to put it primary to deal with this Ebola, and we are front-loading. So resources that were earmarked for the next 2, 3, 4 years, we are bringing them forward, and we are advocating that everybody does the same. Bring the resources to have the critical mass and then deal with this issue. It's an investment for the future.
A sense of urgency.
Absolutely.
The other thing, again, is, you sometimes send money to this part of the world and it doesn't get to what, where it was intended for. How are we going to make sure that these emergency funds put together, all these projections brought forward, will go straight to the Ebola center and not into somebody's pocket?
No, it is, and I disagree with this kind of discourse where they are just stigmatizing African countries, saying that they are corrupt. I disagree. I mean, this is an old cliche that personally I'm not seeing. And I believe that if you want countries like Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea deal with it, we have to trust their leaders. And Helen Johnson Sirleaf was saying it very loudly. I mean, this is my fight. You are my partners. You're supporting me. There is a minimum trust, that you owe me if you want me to deliver. And I think that these are mature people, strong people, nationalists. They believe in their people, and they can do it. We have to keep supporting them. So this discourse that African countries are corrupt, I'm not buying.
Is it not a dangerous assertion to say?
No, it is not. I have seen it, and I have people committed leaders committed for their people. And I salute that, and we have to support to trust. And this old cliche that Africans can't do it is something that I really abhor, and I will keep fighting it. Personally, it's not my experience. I have seen leaders rolling their sleeves and investing for the people.
Same UN tells us that I think Africa loses, $150 billion through corruption in a year. So to turn around and say, oh no, they are still not corrupt, then...
I'm not saying it is true that illicit transfers of resources exist all over the place. Huh? It's not only political leaders. It's a fight. We have to keep fighting. It's not only in Africa, by the way, but we cannot afford, as in Africa, because with all the needs, we cannot afford this. I've read a report by the Kofi Annan panel, the elders, where he says that this continent lose $60 billion per year in illicit transfers, which is huge, because $60 billion, if you take the GDP of Africa of 1.3 trillion, is 3-4-5%. It's huge. So that's the fight we have to do. It's not because we have some problems here and there that we have to extrapolate and see that it's binding and stopping us to move. I'm not saying they're epiphenomenon. They are very serious. We have to deal with that. They are not secondary. We have to deal with that. But that shouldn't be the way to characterize the business in Africa. I have seen, you said yourself, seeing emerging, vibrant, young African private sector leaders. That's there. It's where we have to invest. And I have seen public leaders, new creed that is transforming the continent. So I'm very proud of what I'm seeing on the ground.
I'm going to take a break here. When I come back, I want to find out, so does the status quo remain? Does every country just get dispersed a percentage to go towards Ebola? And moving forward, I think one thing that could really, really minimize this is education. After this, what are we going to do with good quality, proper education? Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Hello, and thanks for staying tuned. Abdoulaye Mahdia, as the UN Assistant Secretary General and also Director, UNDP's Regional Bureau for Africa. So you can, I don't envy this man. He must have one hell of a job to do. And I congratulate you.
Thank
and
you.
Keep on the good work. Before the break, I was just wondering, does every country get assigned, a few millions of dollars? Take this in preparation for your Ebola, or take this in your fight for Ebola? Is that the modus operandi?
No, it's bigger than that. As I said, it's part of it. Government has to lead and need resources. We have to give resources, but there's a huge partnership behind that international partner has to do, because government have limited capacities and need support from the partners. So it's a partnership exercise, empowering government, giving them the resources to do so, but being next to government to do the job. That's what we're doing.
Okay. I was going to go to education, but before I do education, I want to come back to AU. Is AU ever going to get any close to the EU, where leaders trust each other and at least open their borders and trades among themselves? Because the percentage of trade among ourselves is so little, considering the market available. And an example that comes up every day is the fact that Ghana is very conducive for salt mining, yet Nigeria buys salt from Brazil. And till this day, we've never realized that, listen, just mine the salt and just take it to Nigeria.
Yeah.
You know, are we ever going to get there?
And we must, and that's my biggest criticism. If I have, you were saying that I was nice to our leaders, but whenever I meet with them, I have this strong criticism. AU is having what they call the Vision 2026. They want to have this kind of African economic integrated community by 2026, which is a kind of rediscovering or repeat of the noble vision we had earlier during the Lagos Plan of Action, where after we wanted to have the African economic community, it didn't happen. And I tell them it will not happen again if we really don't integrate. I have read, actually you have, out of the 53 countries in Africa, I have read 30 national visions where leaders want to emerge, go through emergence, which is extremely noble. And when I read those visions, I seldomly see a focus on regional integrations. And I'm saying we do it together or we won't do it. And that's my plea, and I told African leaders, you cannot emerge alone by your own self. If you don't invest in integrating infrastructure like energy or roads, binding your economies together, creating this economy of scales, you will never do it. Côte d'Ivoire alone, Senegal alone, Benin alone cannot do it. And people have to understand. I agree with you, the concept of being an EU, AU has to become an EU, and that investment is to be done. I don't understand what would prevent us, for instance, to having a portfolio that are led continentally. Foreign affairs, we could do it continentally. The military portfolio, we can do it continentally. Finance, we can do it continentally. If I were to make a decision or an advice on the AU leadership, I would advise, for instance, that some of these commissioners be given continental powers to do that, or agriculture. If we don't do that sacrifice, that leapfrog, that jump, we won't do it. And that's my line, and I'll keep pounding it. Africa has to be united, or Africa will not exist as a continent. And I agree with you that integration is the business of the moment. If we don't do it, all our investment will be, as economists say, a sunk cost, meaning to no avail.
Should Africa have the American / English democracy, where you go to the polls, give absolute powers, literally imperial powers, godly powers to one man, and tell him that in 4 years, I'm coming back for it? I mean, are they going to have time to think of integration? Because they're constantly thinking of how do I stay or win my next election. I mean, should we have a different democracy for us?
No, the problem is not there. It's that you have to ensure that, because the time for development is different from the time for politics. Politics is a cycle that comes every 3 years. But if you don't align the electoral cycle with the development cycle, you won't go far. And the way to do it is that when you want to set up a long-term vision, you don't do it as like the vision of the head of state or the vision of the party. It has to be a national vision. So whoever win the elections cannot betray the people, because this is a public good of all of us. We make, you and I and all of us, all the segments of society agrees on the long-term vision. We own it. Now, whomever we decide to drive for the next 4 years will have to follow that path. So the magic bullet is to ensure that we have a commonly agreed path and then let the politics play in. So that's basically what we need in the continent.
My pet topic is education, because I have a feeling once you get that right, you're about 70–80% on course, because you don't then need to go and tell somebody, come and vaccinate your child, because they know the importance. You don't need to tell them, send your child to school. Even if it's expensive, they will find the means to send that child to school. What are we doing to nail education? Because you wouldn't even have to come and tell us to do Ebola. We would have been in the forefront fighting it, and you'd be in your office just sending congratulatory notes. What are we going to do?
I fully agree. If I had only $1 in my pocket and you ask me where to invest for the future of Africa, it would have been on education. And even if you push me further, I would have taken 80 cents for girls' education and 20 for boys. Girls does it, they do it. I mean, the girls' education does it. And we failed in the very past to invest in education. You're right. I mean, an educated man is the man that's development or health. You don't fight. If I'm educated, I understand there's no need for me to go to conflict. It will be a lost game. So education is the heart of the matter. Is the sector we have to invest enough. We haven't done it. We tried in the country tried in the 70s, and they were hit by these structural adjustment programs. And the first target was to hit those social sector, health and education. But now we see the price, you know. And then conflict came. You see again the price. What's happening I'm not castigating those programs, but the very fact that we have not been investing on education and health is catching us. But you're absolutely right, and we cannot. The down payment for the future is education, and you have to do it now. And girls' education is at the heart of it.
Paramount. Is there any UN program or another revolution, may I call it, like UN MA, but UN education for Africa that would, say, listen, guys, go and do it and save the whole world all these, trouble? Because once we do it, we are halfway there. Yeah. Not more than halfway there. Is there any program? We
have, and we're working with Gordon Brown Initiative on Education, and he is doing fantastic, and the UN is really behind. And we all agree that that's where the nail has to, we'll be hitting the nail to make this. It's the pressure point, and you touch that pressure point, you touch all of them, and it has to continue. But that's the UN, but it has to start home. As I told you, in terms of priority, if I were a government, I would ensure that my maximum investment will be in education. I may not see the return overnight, but I am convinced that even if the return will be trickling down slowly, it's a safe return, a sturdy return, an intergenerational return. So, and I understand that, and as we were discussing earlier, you may not see the results now. It may not pay off electorally speaking. That's why you have to always agree with all segments of societies on the trajectory of your development. And if we all agree that the matrix of development is education, we can agree in a law that any public finance budget, any budget has to secure a minimum of 40% or 50% on education. Some countries are doing it, but you have to make it a binding law that no government can change tomorrow when changing constitution. If the people, we all agree that this is an investment to do, let's make it a binding law.
It will pay off. 60 days we need to halt Ebola. How are we going to do that?
60 days, not we need, we must.
Wow.
If we don't do it, all the experts are telling us that because today you have this is the rate of, the evolution rate is doubling every 2 to 3 weeks. That's what we're seeing now. It is very scary. If you don't stop it in 60 days, we will hit a trigger point that we cannot catch it anymore. So we have no other option. This is a situation where you have only one option: stop it. That's why, the Security Council, when they met, they invoked chapter 7 of the charter, saying that this is an international threat. It's a war, and we have to have a coalition to fight it. So again, that's why I say it's not Africa; it's beyond Africa. It's the international community to fight this stuff. If we don't stop it in the next, if we don't reduce by 70% the transmission in the next 60 days, that's what the experts are telling us, we are in big trouble.
So what are we doing? Everybody should stay in their house for the next 60 days?
No, you shouldn't stay. No, you should do the work and educate people, communicate well, protect yourself. That's why we're doing a lot of community engagement. Word cannot stop. Contain where we find that there are issues. Be cool-headed. I know it's not easy in this kind of situations. And do the job. It's the way to do it.
I know there were certain parts of Liberia, I think Sierra Leone, where, you know, communities were literally stoning people because they suspected them of having Ebola. So look, let me just eliminate you before you, you know, kill everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, how are we reaching them to say, listen, that's not the way, and therefore, and if somebody is suspected to have Ebola in the house, what then happens? Everybody stays in their room and don't touch each other. What's the...
And that's the job that really you can help as media to do. Education, communication, awareness is critical in this exercise. And that's not people, the fear factor and the despair factor are terrifying. It happens in these kind of situations. It happened in the past. But only education can do it. Community engagement, leaders engagement, media engagement. I remember last week I just came in from Cote d'Ivoire. We are having quote unquote education of the media. How we can use the media to be leader in communicating what to do. So we, the UN, would be happy to be behind supporting the media to communicate better. That's the way forward, I think.
What are the first, because I know until you start bleeding and are very, very sick, you're not contagious.
Yes.
So what are the first signs that anybody should say, no, I don't feel right and I think I need to see a doctor? And even that, probably you're not even safe to walk into the hospital and probably have to walk into some isolation center, which becomes a challenge because not every hospital has that isolation center. So, I mean, what are we, the media, supposed to tell people that, listen, if you think your temperature is too hot to do A, B, C, D, what are we supposed to tell them?
First, the prevention, be aware of what you're doing, your surroundings, what you're touching. And so the awareness issue is extremely important. That's the investment number one. And if you suspect or feel that you're not right, go to a medical center. I think it is important. The more you say, the higher the price you will pay for yourself and your community. So it's as simple as that. Not that simple, but again, with education, people are starting to do so.
But I just want to assure your viewers that until the person is oozing blood and really sick in bed, they are not contagious. So if they are fit, working, and they have a fever or a headache, you know, you don't have to stone them to death. They're
Absolutely, yeah. But the moment you, again, for education, telling people that the moment you have these symptoms, it's advisable that you go to a medical center. Isolate yourself and get there, because the more time you wait, the more lethal it will be on you. So again, it's a good behavior if the person...
Are there any vaccines available now?
Well, there are a lot of work doing so. As I was telling you earlier, where we are urging also African medical staff to invest in research. But that's part of the plan. How can we come up with these vaccines? I'm not a medical expert, but I hear that it's not an easy stuff, but we should not despair. People are really investing. The Institut Pasteur and the CDC in the US are really investing on this.
There's a report that says Liberia has run out vaccines about 50%. I mean, what vaccines are they talking about?
No, they're saying that because of the crisis, the rate of vaccination that we used to have in the past has dropped.
Okay.
That's part of the effect of, of the impact that this is having. Terrible economic impact, but terrible social impact. Now, having 50% of the rate of vaccination dropping is very threatening for our population.
Thank you very much, Abdoulaye Mahdia, who is the UN Assistant Secretary General and Director of UNDP's Regional Bureau for Africa. And he has given us his time in this very, very busy day. I want to say thank you very much. We are grateful.
Thank you, Nana.
I hope it's been a very educative, folks. I'm sure you've learned a thing or two. Tomorrow we'll be back to do it all over again. Thanks for watching.